a lot of our communication, most of our communication is done in a written manner. One of the things that the Marines do really well is what's called a 5-paragraph order. The leader giving instructions to the unit about what they're going to be doing. It's done in the same 5 paragraphs, in the same order: situation, mission, execution, administration, logistics, command, and signals. Everybody in the entire organization knows exactly what order the information is going to be given in and what part they're listening for that's going to be applicable to their particular job. This was a huge mistake that I made early on when I first started, is I didn't have a structured method of communicating with the team. So things got missed. And when they communicated back to me, information that I needed wasn't there. And so it wasn't until when ChatGPT first came out. So we use OpenAI now for absolutely everything. And one of the things you can do if you've got a subscription to it is you can create what's called a custom GPT, a very specific GPT that is designed to do one thing and one thing only, which will take your input, whatever format you put that into, just could be stream of consciousness paragraph, and it will then take all the pertinent information and it will put it into a structured format that we use internally, and it is always presented in the same order every single time in the exact same way, so that each person on my team knows which part of that order they're looking for their information. Everybody knows that there's going to be a part which pertains to them and that they need to be able to do that.
If you've been thinking about outsourcing, expanding your business, getting help for the amazing work that you're doing, then I think you want to join us for this conversation, because we're going to look at the ins and outs of what that actually means for you as a person and your business for the long game. That's why we have Chris here today. He's going to tell us a little bit about himself, why this topic matters to him, and why it absolutely matters to you. Chris, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Shauna. I really appreciate it. And I am very passionate about having companies outsource their training to professional organizations who can manage that better for them. I think it's one of those things. The training department is incredibly important to a company. It's the heartbeat of the company. It is absolutely a revenue generator. It is not a cost center. But on the other hand, it is not, for most companies, within their circle of competence. It's not what they do best. And while it's very important, it's also important to bring in professionals to make sure that the training mission gets accomplished correctly.
That makes a world of difference, absolutely. And it makes total sense. Now, what I'm curious about, because you're talking about organizational things with many employees and we're talking about turnover, I want to know, how does this apply to someone like me? How does this apply to a coach or a consultant, a service provider who is perhaps a solopreneur, but looking into the opportunity of becoming a micro business owner, someone who's looking into either legitimately hiring an employee and or contracting out to people who they need to train, who they need to be able to trust and delegate to within certain systems and operations that may or may not work to the best of their ability. How do you approach that point of view?
So that is a wonderful change in paradigm, because a solopreneur, a coach, a consultant, they don't have the kind of resources that obviously a large corporation does, but the training need is still very, very present. And so there are a lot of ways that you can accomplish very, very micro kinds of training and instruction, but you can do it on a very professional level, and you can make this something that is pertinent to all of your employees or contractors if you've got those. Let me give you one example. If you take an iPhone, your basic iPhone, and you record a process on it. The cameras on the iPhone these days are wonderful, and the video quality is excellent. If you can put that video then someplace where it is accessible to the people that you're interested in reaching, could be Dropbox, could be Vimeo, could be TeacherTube, could be a myriad of different platforms. What you can do then is, from Google Chrome, if you look in the upper right-hand corner of Google Chrome, there are 3 dots. And if you go to those 3 dots, for example, and you were to click on them and you were to scroll down, what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to find a location there where you can add a QR code. And that would be under, if I'm just doing it quickly right here, it's going to be under Cast, Save, and Share. And at the very bottom, it says create a QR code. What that is, that will create a QR code to whatever that resource is. Now, it could be a video, could be a PDF or a checklist, something that you've put together that is important for your team to be able to access. But that QR code then can be placed anywhere. It could be put on a website, could be printed out and pasted next to a copy machine or a fax machine, or if they still use those kinds of things. Wherever that training is going to be most applicable, that QR code can be placed. And what that does is the person who needs that training in the moment can use their video, use their camera, scan it, and they've got that video or that PDF or whatever training that you've provided right there on demand. And I think that that's a really cost-effective way for people to get information quickly to the people that they need in the moment that they need it.
I absolutely love that answer, because I honestly didn't realize that I was able to do that through Google Chrome. So you've taught me something today. And I love the idea of being able to make it so accessible. I do a lot of Loom videos for any of my contracted team members. And I love doing that. I think it's so helpful, because then I do the task. So the task gets done, check. Let's say it's a daily or a weekly or even a monthly task. Then the next day, week, or month, somebody else can look at that and emulate it and get trained a lot faster without me having to be present throughout. Now, that said, it doesn't eliminate the benefits of having somebody to be present who knows what's going on. I think that there's a place for that, for sure. And I'd love to hear your point of view on that, because one of the things that you and I share values-wise is having a business that's actually going to be able to grow in a sustainable way, in a way that's very values-aligned and collaborative, not something that is just pillared, these separate silos. So what I'm curious about is, where do you see the role of, we're going to call the leader of the organization, whether it's a small organization or a big one?
Mm-hmm.
You see the role of a leader in this whole training and outsourcing situation, and how does that impact the growth of the business overall, but specifically when it comes to sustainability?
This question is something that I spend all of my time early on with clients discussing, and it is also the single question that is most ignored by every one of the clients that I deal with. Training is, most companies, most organizations do not have a problem with training. They don't have a problem with creativity. What they've got a problem with is vision, and the connection of that vision to the actual people who are going to bring that vision to fruition. Let me give you an example. The analogy that I always use is crossing a river, and the opposite bank is obviously the goal where you would like to be, but you're going to need a series of stepping stones in order to be able to get to that location. And it's the job of your training team to put those stepping stones in place, whether that happens to be in-person training, as you mentioned, or whether it is something on your learning management system, or a combination of both. But they're going to be the ones who are going to take you from point A to point B. The problem is that in most organizations that I have worked with, there is a huge disconnect in the vision that the C-suite has and the communication of that vision to the people who are actually going to be implementing it. And I don't know whether it's the communication part that is the problem, or whether it's the actual creating the vision part. Creating a vision, you as a CEO need to look 5 to 7 years into the future, and you need to say, this is where I want my business to be. And the problem is, it's really difficult to do that. You've got to do all kinds of anticipation. Where's the market going to be? Where are my people going to be? Where should they be? Where are they now? And it takes sustained consecutive thought, which is a really, really difficult thing to do. And it's just easier to put out the fires that are right at your feet. And unfortunately, that is not what the C-suite needs to be doing in order to make the training team's job successful. They have to paint that picture as clearly as they can possibly paint it, where this company is going to be 5 to 7 years from now. If they can do that, my experience has been that the training team is smart enough to figure out how to get them there. And they can put together a wonderful plan for that. But if they don't know which direction the company's headed, all they can do is put together the basic compliance kind of stuff, which quite frankly, most employees hate and just want to click through and get done with. And that's definitely not what an organization needs to be successful.
No, absolutely not. And I remember being that employee. I absolutely remember being that employee. Oh, we're doing WMIS again. Excellent. Great. We love that. I know
OSHA training, wonderful.
that's right. Oh my goodness. And it has to happen every year or so. And so you're doing it on repeat and it's just a bore. So these training situations need to really be driven by something that's a little bit more meaningful, something that's a little bit more in alignment with the trajectory that you want to go in so they can see where they're heading, not just sit in the muck of where they're at. I think that that is powerful, not just if you have a team or if you are outsourcing. I think that's powerful just for the individual.
It's huge and it's so hard to do. Just look at it on your own in your own personal life and envision where you yourself are going to be 5 to 7 years from now. And then try and imagine what steps you're going to take to get there. Well, most of us are going to say, well, to be where I want to be, I need to be going to the gym, for example, every day. And I need to be eating cleaner than I am. And I need to be getting more sleep than I'm getting. I need to be cut back on these other things that are interfering with that. And we all know what the steps are if we can actually commit to that vision. But it is a tough thing to do. And the nice part about having an organization is you just have to create the vision and let somebody else force you into the steps to get there by setting up schedules for your team to take training and doing those kinds of things. But it's very, very difficult on a personal level, on an organizational level. But let's face it, that's why you're the CEO. That's why you're getting paid the big bucks.
It's true. And one thing that you said that really caught my attention was when you were talking about how something really establishing this vision in a very clear and aligned way, it takes a certain amount of sustained thought. I think you said it was something about sustained and focused thought. Consecutive thought. Thank you. Yes, sustained consecutive thought. And a lot of people are stuck putting out these fires at their feet instead of being able to organize themselves in their day so that they can have that sustained consecutive thought. And one of the attributes of a good leader, of a good business owner, would be the ability to set aside that time. That's leading by example, because you would want anyone who you are having on your team, whether it's through contract work or through employees, to be able to do the same thing within their capacity, within what they're meant to do, so that they're not just putting out fire, so that they're not sitting there stomping out the next thing. They're actually able to align with that vision that you've been able to deliver to them. So I think leading by example in this space is almost the theme. That's almost the push of any sort of training, learning modules, anything that you're putting out there. You need to be ready, willing, and able to step into that leadership role.
I agree with that. And leading by example is one of those, it's a sort of a cliche that every management training will throw out. Unfortunately, you're absolutely correct. And it's one of those things. I spent a lot of time in the Marine Corps. I spent 7 years enlisted and 5 years as an officer. And it was leadership by example was something that you heard 50 times a day. But there it becomes very, very obvious if that doesn't happen, because in that organization, it's a very physical organization. So you are either at the front of the group leading or you are not. And as an officer, if you are not, that's very obvious. Unfortunately, when we look at an organization, a business type of organization, nonprofit, something like that, it becomes much more difficult. I think where it is appropriate for a leader to make their presence known, and I don't see this in 90% of the organizations that I deal with, in the area of training. You as a leader have to be seen to be doing training alongside the people that you have. Most training organizations, when they put courses together, they aim those courses specifically for the frontline troops. And those are the people that are going to, and here's an example, and this is kind of a funny one. Maybe 3 days ago, I was talking with one of my clients, or a member of an organization that contracts to us. And she was complaining that she had to go through some I mentioned OSHA training. She had to go through a 45-minute training, I think it was, she said, on how to properly assemble a ladder and correctly use the ladder in the workplace, etc. Except that her job doesn't involve ladders. Her job is in the front office doing bookkeeping and accounting, those sorts of things. But yet she was required to go through this ladder training. And she just shook her head and said, an absolute waste of time that is. But that mentality, that kind of training is what I see in a lot of organizations.
Mhm.
Contrast that with the gold standard, which would be an organization that has a well-mapped pipeline for the employee life cycle. So the employee is onboarded, you've got year 1, year 2, year 3, maybe they movement now at year 3, they're making a lateral move to a different department, or they're moving up to middle management or something like that. Maybe they're, after 5 or 6, they're looking to transition into some kind of senior leadership role. But at every stage in that learning pipeline, there should be a touch point. There should be courses that apply to those people, so that not only are they able to develop the skills that they need to be able to advance, but that they have a clear vision of what they can be advancing toward. And what that does for an organization, and I apologize for rambling here because I'm definitely on my soapbox now, and we see this all the time, the 3-year mark is the key mark for most organizations when you have the biggest employee churn. Because at the 3-year mark, you've become comfortable enough in your own job that it's not as challenging as it once was, but you don't have a clear pathway forward or even laterally, so that you're not quite certain what your future looks like with this organization. You're not sure what your career trajectory is. And so you start looking outside the company for other challenges or other places that you could advance. And that's terrible for the organization, because the last thing we want to do is pay somebody a lot of money to get all of that accumulated knowledge and then just let that knowledge walk out the door. And now we got to start fresh for somebody else. So you have to have that training pipeline that is showing everybody in the organization what their job not only is, but also what it could be in the future. And again, it takes a lot of thought to put that together. But it's not monolithic, though. And I really wanted to point this out because you brought this up earlier. It takes sustained consecutive thought, but it's not a one and done type of thing. It's iterative. So there's always going to be refinements that you're going to be making to this. New training you're going to be adding, old training you're taking out. It's a living process. It's not a document, but a living process that I think it's really important. The C-suite has to be involved with that every single day. They have to know that they have to believe that if your employees are truly the most important element in your organization, you have to treat them that way. You have to grow them, you have to nurture them, and you have to be seen there in almost a parent-like role, showing them by example, as you put, what it is that you're looking for out of them, to make your company truly successful.
Absolutely.
All right. I apologize for taking up all of your time.
Oh, no, that makes so much sense. And I think that when we approach this from the point of view of, I have to always go back to like my own experience, because a lot of my clients are in a similar space. A lot of my audience are in a similar space where we're sitting here going, but I'm an entrepreneur, but not just an entrepreneur. I'm a solopreneur, or I'm a micro business owner, or I contract out. So where do I sit in this conversation? And I think it's really important to note that everything that you just said, Chris, is absolutely applicable to that demographic. Right? I see this all the time in my growing team. If I'm not following through with something, if I'm not organizing the processes within which I function, and if I'm not giving clear instructions and a vision toward the future, they're not either. And they're not able to lean into their own autonomy or initiative. They lack that because they're not able to really see the path forward. And that's why I take my CEO weekends. That's why I take a moment to connect every single week with my team. That's why I say, hey, first things first, how are you? This matters, right? I want to know what drives them. Yeah. I know what my big vision is, and I articulate that very detailed for them so they understand, and I encourage this diversity of thought. You mentioned something else about how most businesses are not losing out on their creativity, but in their inability to execute happens there. And so when we streamline all of this, when we invite and nurture the ability to be creative, to think outside of the box and lead by example in that capacity, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but your business growth is exponential in that bucket, right? And sustainable.
I love that. And one of the things that you brought up, you mentioned here that brought up a thought. We use within our company, we use a project management tool called Basecamp. We don't actually, within our company, we're all remote. So we don't have, for the most part, Zoom check-ins. I'm not a big fan. I'm on calls all day. They're on calls all day with clients. The last thing I want to do is have another call with them. So a lot of our communication, most of our communication is done in a written manner. One of the things that the Marines do really well is what's called a 5-paragraph order. And the 5-paragraph order, anytime that you have the leader giving instructions to the unit about what they're going to be doing, it's done in the same 5 paragraphs, in the same order: situation, mission, execution, administration, logistics, command, and signals. Everybody in the entire organization knows exactly what order the information is going to be given in and what part they're listening for that's going to be applicable to their particular job. And so this was a huge mistake that I made early on when I first started, is I didn't have a structured method of communicating with the team. And so things got missed. And when they communicated back to me, information that I needed wasn't there. And so it wasn't until, well, I'll tell you exactly when it happened. It was when ChatGPT first came out. So we use OpenAI now for absolutely everything. And one of the things you can do if you've got a subscription to it is you can create what's called a custom GPT. And essentially all that is a very specific GPT that is designed to do one thing and one thing only. And one of the things that we have is a custom GPT, which will take your input, whatever format you put that into, just could be stream of consciousness paragraph. And it will then take all of the pertinent information and it will put it into a structured, we call it an orders format or a task format, but it's a structured format that we use internally. And it is always presented in the same order every single time, in the exact same way, so that each person on my team knows which part of that order they're looking for their information from, whether it's the developer, the course designer, whether it's the DevOps guy. Everybody knows that there's going to be a part which pertains to them and that they need to be able to do that. And it's a couple of bucks to get a subscription to this thing, but the number of custom GPTs you can create are absolutely limitless. And so we've got one that does nothing but put instructions into a task format. We've got one that does nothing but do SQL coding for us. We have one that does nothing but communicates to the client, so that when we put our stream of consciousness down, and a lot of my contractors are overseas workers, and so English is good, but not perfect. So all they have to do is communicate either in their own language or in English, put their thoughts down, what they want to communicate to the client, and that's immediately structured in the format that we're looking for: perfect text, perfect grammar, and it provides a much more professional, polished product. But you don't have to think, and it's done for you, and it buys you a lot of time, and you save yourself the stress of thinking, God, did I remember to tell the person this? It's right there for them, and they know exactly where to look for it.
I love using GPTs and custom GPTs for these exact purposes. It streamlines everything. And I understand where you're coming from when it comes to keeping everything on paper and not necessarily having to have extra meetings. And I think there's definitely a place for that, depending on the types of things that you are outsourcing and the types of work that your team is doing. I know that in my capacity, and a lot of the people who I work with, a lot of these coaches and therapists, service-based providers, they are working with a growing understanding of all of the moving pieces within and around their business. And so those touch points, I think, are really important as they express themselves in a more concise way. You have this down to a science, and I want to commend you for that, because it is such a refreshing way of looking at things, just to have things and then I love that. It leaves very minimal room for error, which is something else that kind of pulled my attention. And we're not going to be able to dive into it today, unfortunately. But you mentioned about some of the glaring errors that you happened to stumble into when you first started out in entrepreneurship. And I think there's room for that conversation, of course, within the Marketing Rebels community, but also outside of this container as well. So what I want to invite everyone to do is to reach out to Chris and myself and ask us about these horrible failures that, trust me, we both have stumbled into, that I know I'm more than happy to share. And from past conversations, I happen to know that Chris is more than willing to share his as well, because these are opportunities to learn. And if we can share our stories of our struggles to you, then number one, you won't feel alone, because you may have made those mistakes as well. And number two, maybe you'll learn from them before you make the mistake. So please reach out, leave a comment, and let us know what you think. Now, before we move on, because we can't dive into that conversation right here and now, I do want to invite you, Chris, to think for a moment about a gold nugget, a piece of invaluable wisdom from those failures, from those life experiences that you can bestow upon the people who have joined us here for the conversation today in a way that they can carry it with them moving forward, taking action either today, throughout the week, or maybe it's sometime in the future. They can keep it in their back pocket. Think about that for a moment. And I want to tell everyone who has come to join us for this conversation that this isn't the only one that's going to happen, nor is it the only one that has ever happened. We actually have these conversations every single week, and you're invited. So ring the bell, subscribe so you can get notified when the next one is coming up. And don't forget to leave that comment with all your questions and like it, send it to a friend. This is information that it destroys barriers. Why do you think we are marketing rebels breaking business barriers? Because it matters. We want everyone to be reached with these messages. With that, I'm going to get off my soapbox. And please, Chris, tell the people what they need to hear.
I think that if you want to maximize your time and the time for the members of your team, the most important thing that you can do is never repeat yourself. Never say anything more than once. Instead, record whatever it is that you want to say. Make sure that you've done it in exactly the way that you would like that message to be communicated, and then save that recording somewhere and provide it to people who need it when they need it, so that you are actually not having to repeat yourself over and over and over again. And that's going to buy you a ton of time, I think.
I love that. Even just you saying that, I know at least a handful of situations where I could apply that information. Now, Chris, I want to ask you to please let people know how they can get in touch with you and who the best person is to actually reach out to you today.
So please, by all means, if you have any questions on training at all, I am just interested in hearing different organizations' dilemmas, what kind of trials and tribulations they're having, how they're overcoming those. It's always interesting to me to learn what everybody else is doing to solve their training problems. And so you can find me at flagshiplms.com. And there's a button in the upper right-hand corner. You can schedule a call with me. It's absolutely free. I genuinely just would like to talk to you about what kinds of situations you find yourself in and how you happen to solving those. And if there's a way that we can help you out, I'd be happy to talk about that as well. But that's not really the important part. The important part is just to hear what it is that you're doing in your organization and how you're best overcoming those difficult situations.
Beautiful. This makes a world of difference when you're able to actually speak to people about what's going on in your business with people who are knowledgeable, who are able to present you with a way forward. Sometimes that's the only thing that you really need in order to jump over the next hurdle that's been blocking you for whatever reason, that glass ceiling that you think is impenetrable. A simple conversation with a kind and knowledgeable other could be all you need. So I invite you. Click the link. There's not only the QR code, but there's also the link in the show notes. You'll be able to access all of Chris's information there. Now, with that, I want to thank you all for joining us today. This conversation has been rich and plentiful. Chris, thank you so much for your expertise. Was surprised at how much I learned today. I thought I had a good handle on things, and I do, but there's always room to grow. And that's the beauty of this situation here. So again, thank you, Chris, so much for joining us today. With that,
I appreciate it. Thanks, Shauna.
I hope you all have a great rest of your day. We'll chat soon.